when the Buddha talks about the path of the Dharma, the path of awakening, when you look in the early canon, especially in the section of the Dhammapada, he has a very concise definition of the path. And that definition is the path is to cultivate the wholesome and to abandon the unwholesome. Right? So that's a nice little framing. There's more to it than that. What does that mean and where does that come from? A couple things to point about that is, first of all, to cultivate is the word bhavana. John mentioned that last time. And all of these 32 dimensions of practice that we're talking about, every single one of them is a bhavana. They are all things that we need to cultivate. They're things that we need to bring into being. We're all stuck with the word meditation. I don't like the word meditation. The word that the Buddha uses is cultivate, which is a really, really good word. It has analogies of seed and fruit. It's the idea of bringing something into being. And all 32 of them fall under that category. So he asks us to cultivate these qualities, and he asks us to abandon or to overcome or to let go of these unwholesome qualities. Which is also just a very important reminder that really what that means is that the whole project of the Dharma is the project that's rooted in ethics, for lack of a better word. Maybe ethics is a fine word. It's a little bit dry, I think, but really about virtue. It's about virtue. It's about integrity. It's about living well. It's about developing the better side of our humanity and letting go of the not so good stuff. So the project, the Wisdom Project, is really about becoming the good person, becoming somebody who is net positive in the world, we might say. And that's really important to get a sense of that. Now, the good thing about this is when you look at to cultivate the wholesome and to abandon the unwholesome, those two ideas are the middle two of these four great efforts. So he starts with 2, he goes to 4, eventually goes to 32, but it's good to get a sense of where all of this begins. So let's just look at these words wholesome and unwholesome, because I think it's important as we start off that we get really clear about what we're talking about. In Pali, the words are kusala and akusala. In Pali, just a note about Pali is anytime you see the word a or the word an in front of a word, it's a negation to what follows. So akusala is unskillful. Just like anatta is not self. Anicca is not absolute. So something about language is it means it negates what follows. And so we could use a couple different words. We could use the word wholesome, or we could use the word skillful, which is a word I'll use a lot. I think it's really good. If you go to Insight retreats, if you participate in kind of the Vipassana movement, you're going to hear them talking about skillful and unskillful, skillful and unskillful. And when they use those words, what they mean is kusala and kusala. So that's really, really right there at the beginning. We could say wholesome and unwholesome. We could say skillful and unskillful. In a clinical sense, we would probably use the word adaptive and maladaptive. We want to develop adaptive behaviors and we want to overcome maladaptive behaviors. In the emotional intelligence landscape, we would use the words constructive and destructive. We want to cultivate constructive emotional episodes. We want to overcome destructive emotional episodes. I think it's helpful to use a range of words because we really just, of course, want to, as best one can, stay away from the binary of like good and bad, right and wrong. Those just aren't really that helpful. And so what does that actually mean in life? So skillful and unskillful. If something is skillful, if something is skillful, what it does is it means that it increases the happiness of myself and the happiness of others. Or we could just say well-being. Something is skillful, increases my sense of well-being and increases the well-being of others. If it is unskillful, it decreases my sense of well-being and decreases well-being that of others. So it's not just about ourselves, it's about other people. One more thing to add, to just not beat the dead horse too much here at the beginning, but I think this is all very important and relevant, is that The Buddha is way more interested in what is skillful rather than what is true. So we see things like Four Noble Truths. Notice Four Noble Truths not in this list, interesting enough, right? That's not in there. Probably for good reason. We want to stay away from truth with a capital T. We want to stay away from things right and wrong. We want to stay away from having the right view, the correct idea. We basically want to stay away from anything that even slightly reeks of morality. We're really looking for that which works, that which is skillful. And that makes it more adaptive. Sometimes we have to do things that are adaptive and skillful that maybe aren't necessarily quote unquote true. The Buddha's not interested in what's true. He's interested in what works. What works to liberate the mind in any given moment. That's really his whole project. That's all he cares about. He doesn't get into the weeds around metaphysics and ontology and morality. He actually warns against that kind of stuff. So when we look at the word, let's look at the word now. So we're looking at right effort. Where does right effort fit in the teachings? Well, it is the sixth factor of the Eightfold Path. So if you look at the Eightfold Path, right effort is in there. So when we get to the Eightfold Path, we're going to see right effort again. So a lot of these ideas are repackaged back into the system of the Bodhipakya Dhammas. This one, for example, we'll see it again because it's so important. It's a great place to start. And also the other thing that's important is the word effort. Isn't quite, there's more going on here. So I want to spend a little bit of time on that because I think it's really important. It's been important to me. There's actually 3 different Pali words that are indicated when we speak of effort. The first one, I'll go in order. The first one is the effort that we talk about in the cultivation of the Eightfold Path, which is Vayama. Vayama, you'll see Sama Vayama. Anytime you see the Eightfold Path, and all the times it's listed in the text, it's always listed as Sama Vayama. Vayama means not really effort so much, actually. It really actually probably means something like application. So this is really helpful because it has a lot of pragmatism built in it. How do we apply the mind? And so we also want to keep in mind, in next month or in 2 weeks from now, the next thing we're going to go through is the teachings of the 4 foundations of mindfulness, which is also in the Eightfold Path. And what comes before mindfulness in the Eightfold Path is effort. So it's a really good place to start. Because the word Vayama is trying to tell us how do we apply the mind. And the application here, and I'll talk about this in a little bit, is there's the 4 great efforts. We'll just go through them real quick. First of all, we want to prevent, I'll use destructive and constructive language so you'll get a sense of that. We want to prevent destructive forces from arising in the mind. We want to overcome destructive forces that are in the mind when they're in the mind. We want to cultivate or develop constructive forces in the mind, and we want to maintain those aspects of mind. Right? So we want to prevent and overcome the unwholesome side, and we want to develop and maintain the wholesome side. Pretty good rubric, right? It's like right there. And that's the application that we are looking for. And that's how the mind is applied in the teachings of right effort. The other word that you also see in the text that refers to this list of 4. Now, anytime you see Sama Vayama, you always see these 4. Hundreds of times in the canon. Always this 4, same Pali word, same order. So it's a nice little formula. The other word is Padana. Padana, sometimes they're called the Padanas, and that means like endeavor. How do we endeavor? That implies a sense of journey. That also implies a sense of work. Here's the workload. And also when we look at it, like if we look at it on a macro level, which is kind of how I'm presenting it now, but if we look at it on a micro level, if we look at it like, say you're sitting for 20 minutes in the morning, John pointed out this last time, effort, it's like part of every moment of life. There's always... So this isn't like this mystical framework thing. When we sit and we look at the mind, this is like right there. the effort, the application. How am I implying? How am I inclining the mind? Sometimes we actually incline the mind towards unwholesome, unskillful things, not knowing that we're doing it. So it's there in kind of every moment of experience. So padna means to like endeavor. And then the word that probably indicates its role in moment to moment experience is another word that shows up in a lot of places called virya. Virya is, it's here in the efforts. It's one of the awakening factors. It's one of the five indriyas. The word virya is everywhere. It's a huge concept in the Buddhist lexicon. Now, not to be too critical, but the translators did the best job that they could, and nobody sort of pushed back. Now, when you see the word virya, you'll usually almost always see it translated as energy, which I think is basically useless. Because virya has a very positive, very wholesome connotation to it. Virya is a good thing. Energy, not always so good. Energy is too benign. I don't know about you, but I can, and I do, put lots of energy into unskillful things much of the time. I can put lots of energy into all kinds of fruitless shit. So the word energy does not close to encapsulate the positive connotation of this word virya. John pointed out this last time, and I think this is the best word for it, especially on a moment-to-moment level, is the word courage. Now, if you think about the word courage and the word energy, most people would not think of them as synonyms at all. So when we think about effort, we could talk about it as a courageous energy, a courageous application. There is a lot of energy in it. There's a lot of virality in it. There's a lot of virya has a lot of energetic components to it. But we also have to remember that anytime it's listed in the Pali text, virya, it is a positive, for lack of a better word. It's wholesome, right? There's no unwholesome virya, okay? Like there can be unwholesome other things. Desire can be wholesome and unwholesome, right? I can have wholesome desires, I can have unwholesome desires. Virya doesn't have that adaptability. It's always inherently positive. So when we think about this, it's good to get a sense that there's an application. It takes some courage, there's some energy. One of the things that I'll try to break you from, that I'm trying to break myself from, when we start to approach these lists and we start dealing with things like the Pali language, we want to be careful that we don't try to come up with a one-for-one translation. It's usually like 1 to 5 is probably the best you're going to get, because the Pali words are a lot more complex than the English words. So we want to get a sense psychologically, experientially, what the territory is that we're talking about here, and these virya teachings. So let's go back through this again a little bit, and then I'll take some questions, I think, before we get into some practice. So this always kind of confused me. So the first one, look at the first one, is to prevent. How do you prevent unwholesome states of mind from arising? That seems like it's hard. I don't know about you, but you ever just be sitting in your day, meditating, being in life, and the shit that comes into the mind, some of the things that come into the mind they seemingly come out of nowhere, don't they? You ever just find yourself caught up in something that's pretty unwholesome or unskillful or certainly doesn't serve us? And so I always thought this teaching was confusing because it just seems the stuff that comes into my mind feels so random. That how do I prevent these things rather than just like grit and bear it? And this isn't always unpacked. But here what we're looking for, again, we're back to ethics. How do we prevent unwholesome forces from arising in the mind? Is to live with integrity. People in recovery will get this. If you're being dishonest and you're stealing and you're cheating and you're manipulating people and you're living an unskillful life, you're going to have all these, you're going to have regret and you're going to have guilt. You're going to have all these destructive forces arising in your mind as a result of living out of line with your integrity. I know that for me, when I feel bad about myself or I get caught up in guilt or regret, it's always because of something that I did that I wish that I didn't do. Something that I said that I wish I didn't say. Or on the flip side, it's something, I wish I had said something, but I didn't. I didn't stick up for myself. I let it go. So this is really interesting. The easiest way for all of us to prevent these kind of forces from arising in the mind is to just to live in alignment with our values, with our best sense of integrity. And like, I can't tell you the last time I did something that I really, really felt actually all that bad about. And for me, especially in my active years when I was drinking and doing drugs, I was always, haunted by guilt, shame, and remorse. It just doesn't happen anymore. And that's a resultant. That's what the Buddha calls a resultant. And so this is kind of the best insurance one can buy against these unwholesome forces from arising. So there's that. That's number one. Number 2 and 3 are good to talk about at the same time because they also there's also lots of other teachings packaged into here. So we're trying to overcome unwholesome forces that have arisen in the mind. Now this goes to the Satipatthana Sutta, and this is really tricky. So like right out of the Satipatthana Sutta, it would say, when the meditator has anger in their mind, they know I have anger in my mind. When the meditator has greed in their mind, they know I have greed in my mind. I have jealousy, I have envy, I have contempt. It's in my mind, it's already here. So that requires a couple things that are hard. First of all, it requires a degree of self-honesty. A lot of times we don't want to be honest, be clear, right? We don't want to be honest about some of the horrible shit that arises in our mind. Right? We get in denial about it, or we justify it, or we rationalize it. But the Buddha's saying no. Like with mindfulness, you want to know when there's an unwholesome force arising in the mind. So we want to be willing to be honest with ourselves about these things. The other thing that's really tricky is being able to negotiate in the present moment, having an unwholesome, unskillful quality of mind, but not feeling bad for having it. Like, oh, I'm a bad person because, I want the president to die or whatever your version of that is, right? Wanting bad things to happen to bad people. Like we have these kinds of thoughts in our mind. We shouldn't feel bad or wrong for the mental states that we encounter. This is why things like metta, kindness, mindfulness is so important. Adaptability, being able to be adaptive, being like, okay, like I got some stuff going on in my mind right now that's not really that pretty. And so I want to be honest about that. I don't want to feel bad about that. The other thing I heard recently that's really profound is the difference between let's just use the word hatred for a second, because really what we're talking about is greed, hatred, and confusion. That's really what the Buddha is trying to get us to overcome is greed, hatred, confusion. But let's just say hatred. Let's just say I have hatred in my mind, which I do sometimes. I'll be honest with you. Sometimes I have hatred in my mind, and I know I have hatred in my mind. To be honest with myself about that, I don't want to feel bad or wrong for having the mental state, but I also want to be able to be aware of the state without being captured by the state. This is really hard. This is like advanced. But this is great because you do it sometimes. It's like, I have hatred in my mind. I'm really hating on this particular thing. I'm not feeling bad about it. I'm aware of the state, but I'm not being captured by it, meaning I'm not letting it kind of gain momentum. Right? And so the way that it gains momentum is another set of lists that's not here, but really what we're trying to overcome in the second effort is we're trying to overcome the forces of greed, hatred, and confusion, but more specifically what we're trying to overcome is the 5 hindrances. Craving, aversion, lethargy, restlessness, and doubt. So the Buddha's good. He gives a little list of five. Here's five things to keep in mind, folks. You know, the hindrances. We hear about the hindrances all the time, don't we? Well, that's what he's talking about. The second effort is about really overcoming, recognizing, first of all, the hindrances and then overcoming the hindrances. And so, you know, you could sit in the morning for 20 minutes and you know, this is like you could do this because these things, I don't know what your mind is like, but they arise in my mind all the time. They're always on the schedule every day. All five hindrances every day in some form or another. So I'm honest with myself about them. I don't feel bad about myself for having them. And if I can do that, then I can work with them and I cannot be captured by them. And so this is like, you know, this is like a teaching, but like this is like, you know, like if you just woke up tomorrow and decided today I'm just going to work on effort number two, like you're going to be busy all day. You know, this is kind of really great because it's bringing us right into our direct lived experience, right? So we're trying to overcome or abandon these qualities of mind, abandoning the five hindrances. The next one is, again, the cultivation. It's to develop. He's trying to say, well, once you've prevented these unwholesome forces from arising, once you've abandoned them when they have arisen, then you want to cultivate or develop constructive forces in the mind, wholesome forces in the mind. So like all four Brahma Viharas are right in the third great effort. We want to cultivate kindness. We want to cultivate compassion. We want to cultivate joy. We want to cultivate equanimity. We want to cultivate mindfulness. We want to cultivate generosity. We want to cultivate goodwill. You know, there's a whole taxonomy of terms that we want to cultivate. The other thing that's really interesting, that's really helpful when we start looking at the Satipatthana Sutta, is when you look at the fourth foundation of mindfulness. This is exactly the fourth foundation of mindfulness in shorthand is just these middle efforts. So if you look at the task or the goal of the fourth foundation of mindfulness is twofold. It is to recognize and overcome the hindrances and to recognize and develop the seven awakening factors, which comes at the end of the Bodhipakkadhammas, which is coming. So if you like really slice this stuff down, this is why seeing these lists as integrated is interesting, because it's like it's just repackaged. It's like that, you know, those Russian dolls where there's like a doll, you take out a doll, there's a smaller doll in there and a smaller doll in those things. It's kind of like that. You just start unpacking the stuff. You just get the same shit over and over again. And so we're trying to, the third grade effort is really about the awakening factors. And what's the first awakening factor? Mindfulness. Right? So now we're back to mindfulness. And so we want to use mindfulness to recognize and overcome the hindrances, use mindfulness to develop and maintain the awakening factors. And there you go. That's the end of the course, everybody. Thank you for joining. We'll see you next year. I mean, really, though, like that's kind of it. You know, and if you really wanted a kind of like when I teach this on retreat, I almost always give a talk on the hindrances and the awakening factors because in the context of a retreat or in the context of a day long or in the context of like a 30-minute sit in the morning, everything I just said is super relevant. You know, this is kind of the stuff that's happening in the mind. And so it's also really important to see that in the light of what I'm saying, in the light of the Bodhipakkadhammas, mindfulness is a wholesome quality of mind. And this is the big argument they have in the Buddhist world, which drives me crazy. Like why any Buddhist would want to argue that mindfulness isn't wholesome is insane to me. Like why would you want to argue that? It's silly. Mindfulness is wholesome. It's skillful. It's an awakening factor. So once we already kind of are in that space, and when we get to the awakening factors, I'll talk about it. John mentioned it last time. Is that the Brahma Viharas and the awakening factors are also an interwoven set of lists, which is what I learned. That's what I learned from Stephen Smith. That's what's called Metta Vipassana. Metta Vipassana is when you integrate and you interweave the awakening factors with the Brahma Viharas. And when you do that, there's just the heart opens. There's a lot of joy. It's like, I'm teaching several retreats this summer on the theme of metta vipassana. I suspect I'll be doing that for years to come because it's really kind of a great way to see this. And then so number 4 is to maintain. How do we maintain the mindfulness? How do we maintain the awakening factors? So we've already prevented them from arising. They did arise, we overcame them. We developed these wholesome mental factors, and now we need to maintain them. Right?